True North Health Center. I'm in my room here, and I've completed a 32-day water-only fast. First couple of days before the 32 days, I came here and I ate clean food out of the chef's kitchen to kind of clean up a little bit. Then I did the 32-day fast, and then I came off a refeeding cycle. And the refeeding cycle, five phases in it, and that is to gently introduce whole foods back into your system. So the first 3 days after my 32-day fast was vegetable broth and zucchini soup and celery juice. That was to with my gout. I had a really, really bad gout attack when my body just did a huge detox right at the end of my fast there. And so for 3 days, that's all I had so that wasn't, I wasn't, back eating, meatloaf and mashed potatoes for that 32 days. It's another 3 days of just broth and a little bit of soup, zucchini soup, and the celery juice. Then that was followed up by phase B. So phase A is liquids. Phase B, days of steam. Eating very, very light foods. That was phase of that steam. Phase C was a little more steamed vegetables like broccoli, cauliflower, and some green beans and some asparagus. That was 3 more days of that. Days of where I introduced more of the raw foods back into the diet, the salads and the cucumbers and the tomatoes and the peppers and things like that. Small amounts, not the fruits yet, really. And no potatoes, no starches yet. And then I just finished that yesterday. So that was 9 days of that slow refeeding process. Today is my first day of what they call phase E, unrestricted, which means not unrestricted anything you can eat, but unrestricted as I could eat anything from the chef's cafeteria down there, which of course is all whole food, plant-based, salt, oil, sugar-free, extremely healthy, and I'm just still right in the middle of doing that now. I didn't get breakfast because I was in the middle of doing something else, getting a very intensive blood test. It was 4 or 5 hours this morning. I started at 7 o'clock, and I just barely got back for this call. That's why I'm wolfing down my lunch, and I didn't have any breakfast. And you guys are going to hear all about that later. It's another big surprise. It's the most in-depth blood testing and type 2 diabetes reversal program out there with Dr. Wes Youngberg, Brenda Davis, John Vargas, the E4 Alive team down in Southern California. We're going to go into detail all about that tomorrow as a special surprise for you guys. Of course, nobody knows about it except you on the call right now, but we'll announce that, and we're going to publish all about the program. I have twisted their arm to see if we could let a few more people into that as well, but you'll be able to see I started it, and it's fantastic. I did my closing blood test or my midterm blood test just this morning.
Hey, so, John, I just wanted to. You just got the perfect timing. Welcome, Dr. Goldhamer. You hear us okay?
And
yeah, you'll have to unmute your microphone, sir.
And click on the video.
Let me see if I can find them on here. I'm going to take care of that for you. Can we hear? I hear you, Dr. Goldhamer.
Let me unmute this.
We got you.
Okay.
Can hear you, and there he is. All right. Welcome, sir.
All right. Dr. Goldhamer, thank you for taking the time and graciously setting aside some of his time on his free Friday, unscheduled Friday. Appreciate it right after lunch. Had to rush him away from lunch. But we have a few questions here. I already did the brief introduction of my quick fast, and then I talked about the 5 phases of refeeding and where I'm at. Today's my first day of the phase E, which is the unrestricted, first time in the cafeteria there. And basically, let's just jump right in with you. Kind of, if you could just give people an overview of the fasting, but particularly kind of my fasting experience. I think a lot of people were interested in or worried, he went, too long, and what was this whole thing about gout and all of that. and then we'll jump into some of the questions that we got in advance, and then we'll jump into the questions from the live audience. How about that?
Yeah, whatever you said. That's good.
Okay, it's all you.
Okay, so you want to talk about the reason why you experienced some difficulties towards the end of your fast. Is that what we're talking about?
Yes.
So,
Difficulties, yes, that's wonderful.
Yeah, one of the things about fasting is that it's it can be a very delicate, sensitive process because your body's going through, a very vigorous biological adaptation. For example, the brain changes from burning its normal fuel, glucose, to burning a byproduct of fat metabolism, specifically beta-hydroxybutyric acid. It's a completely different experience, and the person's experience of their life is different while they're fasting than it is feeding. And one of the things that's critical for a successful fast is rest, for example, because if you don't give the body enough rest, the vigorous processes of healing that are trying to take place can be inhibited. For example, during fasting, the reason the body is able to preserve muscle and burn fat is because you're limiting activity. If you're too active, you're going to break down, you're going to need more glucose to sustain muscle activity, and therefore you're going to have to mobilize that glucose from protein through a process called gluconeogenesis. So one of the reasons we have people rest when they're fasting is if they don't rest, they end up burning more muscle tissue. More muscle tissue means more exposure to things like uric acid. And if you build up uric acid faster than you clear it, you get a very interesting process called gout, which is quite uncomfortable and definitely will force you to rest if you let it go on long enough. So in your case, you're too active, despite excellent recommendations to you to the contrary. You ended up having a little bit of accumulation of more uric acid than you could clear the price for it, and it's for your body to unwind that. So definitely a tension getter. Much less common if patients are not busy making movies and running around and doing things that they but it still can come up even in people perfectly. It's still one of the many things that can happen to people when they're going through a process, not just of fasting, but any process associated with rapid weight loss. When you think about it, you've gone through a significant change in weight in a relatively short period of time. If you ever want to get a feel of just how much that is, walk into the grocery store and get one of those really big bags of dog food and heft that over your shoulders and walk around the store for a little while, and you'll see, just the magnitude of change that's occurred. And it happens very, very rapidly. And of course, that change isn't without its consequences, as you well know. What's actually amazing is how well people hold up for days, weeks, even a month or more to this process. Most people can't imagine that. They think if they get on an airplane in New York and they fly to California, they will die somewhere over Colorado unless they eat something. They think the peanuts saved their life. What can I say, And the fact is now that's really not the case. People are well adapted to fast for weeks or even longer if necessary, but it does need to be done properly in order to maximize the benefits that you're going to get from it.
Thank you. That's a great introduction, and definitely I did get punished for that early activity in the fast. Let's just jump right into some of the power through these questions we've got in advance, and then get to some of the people that are here on the chat. So, where can I find the rules and guidelines for fasting, or just in general? What are some of the rules and guidelines for the pre-fast as well?
Yeah, fortunately, we have a website at healthpromoting.com that has an exhaustive collection of both the articles, scientific and lay articles, as well as videos and other materials to help people understand fasting and how to use it better. And you can also read our book, The Pleasure Trap, the last third of which is entirely about fasting and the principles and what's really involved in this rather ancient.
So just in general, just a few of the guidelines when people are coming here, just a little bit of prep, and then kind of.
Yeah, most important thing is that that people are appropriate candidates for fasting. In other words, that they don't have things that would make fasting dangerous or most medications that will be safely weaned even if they're on the fast. First thing is a proper medical history to make sure there's no conditions and or medications that contraindicate the application of fasting. In some cases, water fasting may not be the best approach. It might be better to do a modified program, perhaps intermittent fasting where you limit the feeding window, where you're utilizing 600 calories a day from juices or raw fruits and vegetables. There's lots of different ways of doing cleansing or modified feeding programs that are safe and effective, even for people that might be, for example, medicated, where water fasting might be a little bit too vigorous. So first step, proper screening. Best way to do that is to have a physical examination with a doctor that's not an idiot, that's familiar with fasting and that kind of stuff, who can give you some good sound advice. Second thing is, if you are on medications that can be safely withdrawn, they need to be done oftentimes carefully. Too rapid a withdrawal of medications, for example, steroid medications or neuropsychiatric medications, can result in a problem just from the withdrawal itself. And so that is best to be done under guidance as well. Assuming you have a person, though, that's not medicated and that is a good physical candidate, doesn't have any contraindications, doesn't have problems with electrolyte balance or cardiac rhythm or other things that might be complicating, fasting still needs to be done in a state with good preparation. In other words, we ask people to prepare before they fast by limiting their diet to a whole plant food, SOS-free diet. SOS, of course, is the international symbol of danger, and it also stands for salt, oil, and sugar. So we get people eating basically a whole plant food diet for several days so that when they go on the fast, they don't have problems with acclimation because they're withdrawing from caffeine or they're withdrawing from alcohol, withdrawing from highly concentrated, artificially processed foods at the same time they're trying to adapt to fasting. A lot of times people think it's the fasting that's causing the symptoms when really it's the withdrawal from their drugs and diet. And then once a person is a candidate and they prep properly for fasting, they still need to rest during the fasting process. If they're too active, then they put load on the body that it's not as efficiently able to handle. And instead of detoxifying, they're just compensating for excess load without the calories to supplant it. One of the reasons we've had such a good success rate is because we do those processes. We screen patients, we examine them, we get baseline laboratory so we can monitor them. For example, stuff comes up in fasting that can be a good thing or a bad thing. Sometimes symptoms are unpleasant but positive, part of the body's attempt to heal itself. Some of those same symptoms, though, can be a bad thing, and you have to intervene and deal with it so you don't make a mess of it. The only way you can reliably to have good baseline data, that's where the exam and laboratory testing comes in, because then you have something to compare back to and you can determine a trend. Once a person is done with fasting, perhaps the most delicate part of it is terminating the fast. No matter how long the fast is, it's important that people come off the fast in a gradual and intelligent manner. Too rapid a refeeding after fasting can lead to very serious or even potentially fatal consequences. For example, a person that does a very long fast like you did, 32 days. Too rapid refeeding can lead to syndromes like refeeding syndrome, where you get alterations in electrolyte balance. You can get into very serious difficulties if a person were to go out and do really foolish things with too rapid return to hyper-concentrated foods. By doing the gradual refeeding, for example, in our clinic, we use typically juices or low-density foods 1 day for every week of fasting. We introduce raw fruits and vegetables and then more concentrated plant-based material, avoiding the meat, fish, fowl, eggs, dairy products, oil, salt, sugar, all the processed crap that people shouldn't be eating. By doing that, we avoid these refeeding syndrome symptoms, or we avoid the food shock or post-fasting edema or any of the multiple problems that can occur when people terminate a fast too rapidly. This is where most of the literature citing danger comes in. It's not so much the fasting itself as what happens after fasting, and where people, particularly if they've been in a stress situation where they haven't had anything to eat and then they too rapidly refeed, they can get really, really sick. And so by guiding a person through that intelligently, we can avoid that in most cases.
Great. That was great, because as I was looking through some of the questions, you answered like boom, 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 all the way through a lot of the questions that people had. And I'll summarize at the end that you nailed it. A couple other things here is about during the fast. How much water per day? Filtered water, distilled? Any other liquids allowed?
Sure.
Different size
So water
that.
During fasting should be pure water. There's different ways to purify water. Probably the most efficient way is distillation, but you can also use reverse osmosis or all their multi-filter combinations. The idea is to get rid of the chlorine and the hydrogenated halocarbons and all the crap that tends to show up in municipal water, in part because they're very sensitive and they just don't tolerate all that. In order to get them to drink water, it's nice if it's pure water. So what we do at our clinic is we do a pre-filtered water is steam distilled and then run through a post-filter to catch anything that might come off at the same temperature as water. And you end up with just water, that H2O, just like rain would be if the environment wasn't polluted. And that tends to be well tolerated. It's the water we recommend.
So no vitamins or supplements. What about why? Some people say like why no electrolytes or.
Well, first of all, the amount of electrolytes in water is going to be relatively limited. It's not a major source of minerals. In fact, one apple is going to have more minerals than all the water you're going to be drinking. So it's not a primary source of nutrition. And what we're trying to avoid isn't just the potentially positive minerals, but all the negative things, the mercury, all the contaminants that tend to be unfortunately present in water, and that you might be particularly reactive to in fasting. So all we really want is pure water. And the purest water that we have easily available would be either highly filtered or distilled water.
Great. And here's a short little question. How long should one do a water fast without medical supervision, and how often is it most beneficial? One a day, 1 day a week, a month?
Well, as far as all the intermittent fasting and modified fasting can often be done without direct medical supervision. Water-only fasting is best done with medical supervision. Now, if you're going to do very short-term fasting, that might be able to be done with your local doctor. Somebody should do an exam and baseline lab, though, regardless of the duration of water-only fasting that you're doing, in my opinion. Many people do fast for short periods of time, a few days, successfully on their own, but the ones that do it most successfully are the ones that are appropriately screened, good candidates that rest while they're fast and follow the rules. The ones that don't oftentimes get into trouble, and that can be kind of entertaining but rather exciting. Long-term fasting absolutely should be done under direct medical supervision. It's called medically supervised water-only fasting for a reason, because that means, again, just like the shorter fast, people will have exam and lab baseline, but there are also clinical basis, and that's the way you ensure that it's safe and effective. The nightmares, the horror stories done against fasting almost always are about people that are fasting in an inappropriate manner, not fasting in a controlled setting where these parameters are met.
And now I think the rest of the main questions are about intermittent fasting and the benefits of it. And then there's kind of a new thing that's going around called TRF, which is basically, you can eat whatever you want so long as you just eat within this 8-hour window. If you've heard of that.
Dougal, a colleague, likes to say that people love to hear good news about their bad. A good example of that, the idea that you can eat whatever you want as long as you narrow your feeding window. What's true? Listen, people eating whatever they want anyway, all day long. So if they eat whatever they want, but only for a limited period of time, they're eating less of all that greasy, fatty, slimy, dead, decaying flesh, processed food. So maybe it's less bad. It's nonsense. The reality is health results from healthful living. Now, if you narrow your feeding window, you don't eat before a certain time in the morning, you don't eat late at night, on average, you may be able to reduce the total amount of calories you eat. But you still need to eat health-promoting diet if you want to maximize your health. Eating a bunch of junk because you eat it in a narrow window is only going to be beneficial to the degree that you're eating less overall junk. There's nothing magic about this particular window. Now you can transmute these toxic substances into health-promoting substance. That's not real. However, limiting the feeding window, regardless of what diet you eat, may be helpful for some people to reduce the amount of overeating they're tending to do because, for example, they get tired to eat for stimulation, they feel better and decide they must have been hungry. They weren't hungry, they were tired. And when they're tired, what they should do is go to sleep because that's how you treat fatigue. Now, it is true, diet and food can be a stimulus, so you may give you a temporary stimulation, but anytime you stimulate the body, later there's going to be compensatory depression, you pay the price for it. So narrowing the feeding window might be a good idea. Whether you have, and the reason is you have then a 12, 14, or 16-hour period of fasting every night. And during that, even that brief period of fasting, it appears that the body is able to stimulate biological processes that may be associated with rejuvenation and health promotion, etc. Although I personally feel that those small interventional fasts pale in comparison to the benefits of long-term medically supervised fasting, they still may accumulate and have significant benefit. And our colleague Walter Longo has published a bunch of information, very interesting, about how intermittent fasting may be a useful tool at guiding people towards health. there's other modifications of that where perhaps maybe 1 day a week or 2 days a week, if you can rest, you may reduce your total caloric intake perhaps to 600 calories. 600 calories might be the equivalent of 4 fresh juices, or it might be 2 pounds of salad, a pound of fruit. And, the advantage to using the whole fruit and salad material is that you maintain bowel function and you're training yourself to eat better. The advantage to the juices is they're very sweet if they include some fruit, and so the palate, it's easier for a person not used to eating healthy foods to enjoy them because they're used to the sweeter, highly processed, concentrated nature that the juices present. So for compliance, sometimes people prefer juices. I personally, ideally, would recommend eating the whole vegetable, raw vegetables, and cooked raw fruit. And again, 3 pounds of that, which is a lot of volume, still only equates to less than 600 calories. That's enough calories to meet your brain needs for glucose, so it minimizes gluconeogenesis, but it gives the body a chance to kind of facilitate detoxification, but in a safer way, a way that most people can do even if they're continuing to take their medications. However, I would recommend anybody that's on medications should discuss this with the doctor that's prescribing the medications, because many people have individual conditions or variabilities that might make this a complicated process. If people have done that successfully, let's say they've adopted a whole plant food diet and they were successful with that, and maybe they've reduced their feeding window, maybe they've introduced a low-calorie diet. Another thing they could do might be to do a short fast, perhaps on juices, 2 or 3 days in a row where they rest at home. Or some people, if they meet criteria, they've had an exam, they've got lab, they're a good candidate, might even consider doing a short-term water fast. Again, with rest and the recommendations I've made. People that have to fast for a longer period of time really should check into one of the facilities where they can be monitored properly, because too many people mess it up.
Yeah, absolutely. I would totally mess it up.
Yeah. Well, you managed to complicate it even under my tutelage, so it just shows you how difficult it can be, because you're feeling pretty good. I mean, let's be clear. Why were you too active? Because you were 3 weeks into a fast and still feeling pretty good, and you got a lot on your plate, and you got a lot of reasons why you want to be running around. So you're not going to realize it, especially in fasting. When people feel good, they think they're immortal. They can do anything. And, so it is difficult. And that's one of the reasons why people at home sometimes are so tempted, because there's so many distractions and there's so many temptations. That's why we call True North Health Center the last resort, because you lock people up and you create an environment that's a little bit more conducive to getting rid of some of the distractions.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I hit the wall. There were a couple of questions about fasting and hormone imbalances and liver detoxification.
Yeah, so the liver is the main detoxifying organ of the body, and we put it through just tremendous challenges. Let me turn that down. So, the challenges that the liver faces is having to deal with particularly all these highly processed, heated, beaten, treated, chopped, diced, animal-based products. That along with the kidney and some other functions have to kind of process all these extra products. The consequence is pretty severe, particularly people, for example, that drink alcohol. You wonder why people that drink alcohol get cirrhosis of the liver. Well, it's essentially scar tissue. This is a fatty infiltrate that happens as a consequence to chronic abuse. And so people say, well, that only happens if you drink a lot. Well, whether you drink a lot or you drink a little, it's always a toxin. It's always putting stress on the liver. So you may not be drinking enough to be a fulminating alcoholic, and you may not have clinically demonstrable fatty liver infiltrate. But if you're drinking alcohol on a regular basis, you're asking your liver to work overtime in terms of processing the byproducts of that peroxidation of alcohol. And the same thing's true if you're eating a really high-fat diet. Your body's not designed to eat unlimited quantities of animal foods and highly processed fats and foods. And when you do that, the liver's, one of the organs that takes an extra burden, an extra toll to try to help you compensate for that. So fasting, well, first of all, a health-promoting diet will allow the body to start detoxifying faster than it accumulates. Over time, you get well. Fasting makes it happen a lot quicker. And that's why a lot of people, when they fast, particularly day 2, day 3, day 4, have a lot of nausea. They may dump a lot of bile, this yellow-green material that's really caustic. If you refeed your stomach, you may be vomiting. Sometimes you'll get some diarrhea as you get rid of this these excess acids. These are designed to myceliate or break down fat, so they're necessary. But for example, meat eaters have 5 times as much of it circulating as say, vegetarians that are on a healthier diet. And so when you transition to a plant-based diet, you have a lot of these excess materials that are eventually going to be processed and eliminated. If you do a fast, boy, it happens right away. Your body just immediately starts dumping. And liver is one of those organs that goes through intense detoxification. It's really quite entertaining.
Now let's talk about after the fast. There's and the topic of supplements and protocols, because now my real challenge is really starting now.
Yeah. Well, no question. When you're fasting, that has its own challenges, but the real challenge is living in a world designed to make you fat, sick, and miserable and give you what you want and not what you need. And everywhere you go, everybody's going to be trying to undermine your success and tell you what you want to hear. And it's a real challenge because we're not in a very supportive environment right now. But you have to overcome that. And the more you know, the easier it is to recognize the pleasure traps that are going to be, presented all around you.
Hey, can I jump in really quick? I am just taking all of this in, Dr. Goldhamer, and Jon is, rolling through all of the questions from our community. It's just wonderful stuff. And it's a lot of information. Obviously, Jon has been immersed in this experience, and you're the expert in this field. I was wondering if we could, talk to just, this is a little bit of a side based on several the conversations that have happened in our Facebook group. Is this idea of maybe some simple tips or tricks for people that might want to consider something safe and something that they could do on their own at home. And I was just wondering if you could give maybe some some takeaways for some
Absolutely.
Folks that might be on the call or maybe watching this.
Well, one of the biggest things you want to think about is that if you're willing to adopt a really dangerous and radical diet, that is a whole plant foods diet that's free of sugar, oil, and salt, your body is going, the moment you start doing that, your body is going to start lightening the load. You will start a detoxification process. And for most people, just getting the diet right for a while is really the best step. You don't necessarily have to turn the heat up with a modified or even a full water fast before you've had a chance to acclimate to the diet. Why do people want to do that? I'll tell you why. It's because when you first start eating a whole plant foods diet, it doesn't taste that appealing to you because you're used to the salt, the oil, the sugar, all the processed chemicals. But if you can persist with that, you can adapt. It gets easier and easier. Once that process is completed, now maybe the rate of weight loss is slowing down and you're not detoxifying as much. You've been on the diet for a while and you want to speed things up a little bit. That's where maybe you narrow your feeding window or you add a day or two of modified fasting. And then once you've done that for a while, now you're getting closer to your optimum weight and you've really made some progress. Then you want to turn the heat up even more. Maybe you try a short juice fast at home, or maybe even if you've seen your doctor and had some lab, you do a short water fast at home. And then once you've gone through that process successfully, then you can decide if additional intervention is necessary, then you could consider medically supervised water-only fasting. Or if you're so sick that you really just can't navigate this on your own, then it's best to kind of get some professional supervision and kind of unwinding the process. But for the typical healthy person, on goodness, the first most important thing they can do is adopt a whole plant foods diet. Just do it. And don't do it with 50 exceptions. Do it. It's remarkable how forgiving the body is at overcoming many of the problems that are actually limiting people's quality and quantity of their life.
That's wonderful, Dr. Goldhamer. Thank you so much. So what I heard you say is that step of shifting into the the good choices of the food we're making. I know for me, I've lost a bunch of weight, and we talk about that in our group. But it's a big aspect that we talk about on our calls a whole lot. And then talking about shortening that feeding window, and then after that, maybe shorter watering fast, and then a medically advised water fast. Did I capture all those?
Yeah, and
those right?
The medically supervised water fasting is just if we have to do longer fasting, or if there's complicated situations where people are having to deal with medication issues or health issues that might be problematic on their own. The dietary changes, the intermittent fasting, these can all generally be done quite effectively by people. They're not